It's Women in Space Week, and so we have lined up one of the true greats to come and talk to us today. Colonel Eileen M. Collins, who is both the first female pilot of a space shuttle and the first female commander of a mission.
And we're also joined by Jonathan Ward, the co-author of Eileen's new book, Through the Glass Ceiling to the Stars. He has also written a number of fantastic space books.
Please come and find us on social media. We're at Space and Things 1 on Twitter and at Space and Things Podcast on Facebook and Instagram. And we love hearing from you.
And don't forget to hit that share button or send this to your fellow space travel enthusiast friends. But right now, please enjoy episode 58 of the Space and Things podcast.
Oh my God! Unbelievable, but it is right to touch.
You are listening to Space and Things with Dave Giles and Emily Carney.
I'm Emily Carney.
And I'm Dave Giles, and welcome to episode 58 of our podcast. How you doing, Emily?
I'm doing great. Been real busy lately.
I saw a video, actually, that you were in this week, because it's Women in Space Week, and you were included in a quite amazing video.
Yeah, it's the Christina Corp put it together. It's I'm with some really amazing company in that clip. I'm sure we will link it in the show notes. I watched it and I'm a little humbled because I'm like, man, all the superstars are in this one. I think I'm right after Dr. Shiyan Proctor, and I was a little like, what? I don't belong in this? Okay. I don't even belong in this. She just got back from space, you know? So, yeah, it was a huge honor, and I hope there'll be some lasting resonances from this week's Women in Space Week, which is currently going on.
Yeah, so it was great little video. We will put it in the show notes. And because it's Women in Space Week, I think we should crack on with this week's interview.
Absolutely. Colonel Eileen Collins' new book is called Through the Glass Ceiling to the Stars, the story of the first American woman to command a space mission. And to say she went through the glass ceilings during her career is an understatement. She smashed right through them. After graduating from Syracuse in 1978 with a Bachelor of Arts in Math and Economics, Collins joined the U.S. Air Force and was one of the first women chosen for the undergraduate pilot training at Vance Air Force Base in Oklahoma. Not only did she get her pilot wings and become a flight instructor, Collins also earned 2 master's degrees, one in operations research from Stanford and one in space systems management from Webster University. Not only that, she became just the second female pilot to attend the U.S. Air Force Test Pilot School. Then she became an astronaut. Selected, right? Capping all that off, she became an astronaut.
Exactly right.
Selected in 1990, she flew her first mission in 1995 as the first female pilot of a space shuttle, flying on Discovery STS-93 on a mission to Mir. She also piloted STS-84 in 1997 on Atlantis and was selected as the first female commander of a U.S. spacecraft on STS-93 in July 1999 on Columbia. We've spoken about this mission before, as it very nearly didn't make it to orbit. And the video of this launch is really something. Dave will put it in the show notes.
Yes, I will.
She went on to command STS-114 in 2005 on Discovery, which was the return-to-flight mission of the space shuttle after the Columbia disaster in 2003. Collins retired from NASA in 2006.
So obviously we're thrilled to be talking to Colonel Collins today, and it's all down to the co-author of the new book, Jonathan Ward. Emily reached out to him to see if he'd like to talk to us about this book, and amazingly he arranged for Eileen to join us too. Now, Jonathan has written some really great space books before, most notably Bringing Columbia Home, the final mission of a lost space shuttle and her crew, which really is a must-read book if you're into the space shuttle, despite being incredibly heartbreaking. He also wrote a wonderful book called Rocket Ranch, the nuts and bolts of the Apollo moon program at Kennedy Space Center, which is a deep dive into the facilities at the center and a fantastic description of early operations and procedures with the accounts of more than 70 Apollo program managers and engineers. I love this book. Anyway, let's get on with this interview.
Columbia, Houston, we see a 15 foot per second underspeed. Ohms 1, not required.
Copy
Launch one not declared, and it's great to be back in Georgia again.
Okay, well, welcome Colonel Eileen Collins and Jonathan Ward, and thank you so much for joining us today to talk about your new book. We'll start with a question for Colonel Collins. So was astronaut pilot or commander, obviously, was that something you aspired to from an early age? Or did it become something you wanted to pursue as you developed professionally as a test pilot?
Well, actually, thanks for the question, but actually it was both of those. I mean, my earliest memory of wanting to be an astronaut was fourth grade when I tell this story many times, but I was in Mrs. Whitmarsh's class in fourth grade. I think I was 9 years old, reading an article about the Gemini astronauts. And I was fascinated with them, and I wanted to be just like them. So I read about the things that they did. They were pilots in the military. They were test pilots. They were, for the most part, they were engineers, but they were professional people. And, I thought, I can do that. And there weren't any women astronauts back then, but I just thought that I'll be a lady astronaut, and that would be okay. But then as my life went on and I got in high school and college, in fact, I was in college when the Air Force first opened pilot training to women, and it started becoming more of a reality. And then right when I graduated from college, NASA hired their first women as space shuttle mission specialists. So then it became a realistic goal at that point. So I think to answer your question, it's a little bit of both.
Eileen, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was Jim McDivitt that you really wanted to either marry or be like, wasn't it?
Yeah, he was one of my favorites. Oh, they were all my favorites.
I would have married Jim McDivitt if I had a chance to.
I would marry Jim McDivitt.
Well, I actually thought that I would, maybe I'll just marry an astronaut someday, but I really wanted to go myself.
Which leads us nicely actually on to this next question. So you were interviewed by John Young when you joined NASA. So what was that experience like? And one of our patrons, Toby Jeffries, has asked if you have any John Young stories. John Young stories always seem to go down well. So do you have any anecdotes that our listeners might want to hear about John Young?
Yeah, I have many John Young stories, but I'll be more specific in answering your question about the interview. So John Young was on my astronaut selection board interview, and he asked me several questions. One of the questions he asked me was, have you ever been afraid in an airplane? Now, I thought this was a trick question because every pilot has been afraid in an airplane. I mean, the answer to the question is yes. So I think maybe he was looking for me to say no, because then he would know that I wasn't telling the truth. But I don't remember exactly what I said, but it was something like, which time do you want me to tell you about? So there's many stories that I had. I think I told him about the time I was flying in fog and I had to turn around because I thought, if I kept going, I might be a smoking hole in the Texas Hill Country if I kept flying into the fog. And I was visual flight rules only. And it was a very scary experience. I told him about that. And fast forward 2 months to January 16th of 1990 is when I received the phone call from NASA to tell me that they were hiring me. Well, they called me, they left a message, I called back. I got the secretary who handed me off to the board administrator, who handed me off to another board administrator, who handed me off to the president of the selection board, who was Mr. Don Putty, and then he handed me off to John Young. And the legend sort of goes that if you're not selected, one of the astronauts is going to call you. But if you are selected, you're going to hear from John Young. So I got on the phone with John Young, and he said to me, do you still want to come to Johnson Space Center? Do you still want to work for us? And I thought, well, of course, I still want to work for you. And then he said, well, we want you to come to Johnson Space Center. And he went through 5 minutes worth of training and what the engineers do and what the technicians at the launch site do and T-38s and simulators. And after 5 minutes of this, of course, I'm pretty excited because I knew that the answer was yes. But remember, I had interviewed as a mission specialist. But they asked me if I would prefer to be a pilot. They asked me at least 4 or 5 times. So at the end of the call, he said, "Do you have any questions?" And I said, "Yes, will I be a pilot or a mission specialist?" And he said, "Pilot, you're going to be the first woman space shuttle pilot." And that was my phone call with John Young, who, by the way, is a man I highly respect. And he was very, very safety conscious. He was the chief of the astronaut office during the Challenger accident. And he has always been very safety conscious. And I think that he became kind of like a father or grandfather to all of us, very doting, very constantly asking questions about, is this mission safe for us to fly? And so I felt very comfortable working for him. And I really enjoyed talking with him. I was always nervous speaking with him because I thought he was very intelligent, very knowledgeable. And maybe I was afraid he was going to ask me a question I couldn't answer. But I highly respected. And I have more John Young story. I got a really good one I can tell you later if we have time.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So you were one of the first women to graduate from a military service academy, and you were also one of the first women, if not, I think you were the first woman Air Force test pilot. So if I'm wrong, please correct me, but were there any planes you weren't allowed to fly or planes you were able to fly as kind of an exception?
Well, when I came in the Air Force in 1978, women were not allowed to fly any combat aircraft. So the aircraft were actually categorized as combat aircraft, which would be fighters, bombers, reconnaissance, close air support, which would be like the A-7 or the A-10. Women were not allowed to fly those aircraft. I mean, you could fly a one-time sortie, but you were not allowed to be checked out in the airplane, which takes many months to get checked out in an airplane because you're not eligible to go into combat. So we, the women, were allowed to only fly tankers, which are air refueling, transport, like the C-141, the C-5, the C-17. C is for cargo, and then administrative aircraft. And we were also allowed to be instructors. So I became an instructor. And I should add one other thing. I actually never graduated from a military service academy because back in the mid-1970s, when I graduated from high school, women weren't allowed in the service academies either.
Wow.
Oh, okay.
So the first class that graduated was 1980. But I did teach at the Air Force Academy. And another comment there is I was in the first class of women to go through pilot training at my base in Oklahoma. You know, it might have been the third or fourth class. I think I might have been the fourth class overall in the Air Force, but I was in the first class at my base.
I was trying to do my service academy math in my brain of when like that all happened. So, yep.
How did the two of you end up working together on this book, and what was the motivation behind it?
You know, I know COVID has been a horrible thing for lots and lots of people, but it actually worked out to be a very positive thing for the two of us. I'd been after Eileen for a while. I mean, she wrote the epilogue to Bringing Columbia Home, which I was deeply grateful for. And, you know, I became aware that she had not written her own memoirs. And every time I saw her, I would say, "Hey, have you ever thought about writing your own memoirs? And if I'm not the right person to do it, let me hook you up with somebody who is." And so I'd been hounding her about that for about 3 years. And then I guess the last time we saw each other was at the Space Mirror for the annual Day of Remembrance in the beginning of 2020. And our first conversation was on Cinco de Mayo. I'll never forget that because, but that was last year. And she just said, you know, "Hey, when my schedule's cleared up, do you want to have some time and work on this together?" And so first I had to make sure that she really wanted to work with a male author and not a female author. And she said, absolutely. And so the two of us got to work together and just started going down the path. And it was just a wonderful collaboration because one of the first things we talked about was personality type. You know, I do a lot of work with leadership development, and Eileen's done her share of working with leadership and teams and things like that. We find that we were exactly the opposite Myers-Briggs types from each other. I'm an introvert, INFP. She's an ESTJ, And actually, the two of us had all the bases covered when we worked together. It was a wonderful collaboration. We both asked each other questions that the other would not think about asking, and so for me, it was just a tremendous amount of fun and extremely productive. And when you work with somebody like Eileen, when you light a fire under her, you better get out of the way, because she's going to make sure that whatever you were expecting is going to be delivered way higher level of quality than what you were ever thinking about. So I'm extremely grateful for the opportunity to work for her, and I'm very happy to be able to call her my friend too.
And I might add that I am not a very good writer, so it would never have gotten done without Jonathan.
Well, and I think you sell yourself short, because I think a lot of what I really liked about Eileen too was that she wouldn't rely on it just being interviews. I was prepared for that to be the thing that I would ask her questions and then write it up. But I think the more we talked, Eileen would say, like, let me go away and think about that and write about it. And she'd come back with, thousands of words that she'd written as she really pondered what was the experience like on her first space flight, or, what was going through her mind after the Columbia accident and things like that. And so there was just a lot of tremendously rich material to work with. And I'm very grateful to her for putting so much of herself into that, because I know how busy she is.
The title of this book is Through the Glass Ceiling to the Stars, which I think is a wonderful title. And I'm going to just ask an opinion here. There's obviously been a lot of stories coming out in the space community about the continued problems with misogyny within the industry and around it. And I try and observe these conversations and not have an input, because I don't feel it's my place to say. But I do observe, and the comment you see from people who seem to disagree that it exists seems to be someone saying something along the lines of, there can't be a problem with sexism in spaceflight because we had Eileen Collins command the shuttle. Do you have anything to say to that person who would think that kind of thing? Or do you have any thoughts on where we are now? I'm not expecting you to comment on any particular news story, but obviously there's a number of things that have been brought up recently.
Well, that is a very difficult question and a very difficult topic. So I do acknowledge the fact that there are issues in the workplace, and it's not only obviously in space industry or science or technology, but it's throughout the United States, in I'm sure in other places. I can't speak for the rest of the world, but I do follow the news in the United States, and I do know that these are issues. And I go out and give talks, and women come up to me, and they even ask me in the Q&A section about the specific question that you just asked me. So I know it's an issue. So I try to be sensitive to that, and I try to give my message to men and women, because there's two sides to every action that happens. You've got two things that are going on in different perceptions of what's going on. And I think it's really important that people are honest with each other. So I went through pilot training at Vance Air Force Base, and I was in a class, well, there were about over 500 pilots on the base. My class had 40. And we, in that class, were the first 4 women to ever go through pilot training at that base. And they had been training pilots since 1944, since World War II. So I was very sensitive to the fact that maybe some of the men didn't want the women there. And it turned out there were actually some of the wives that didn't want us there either. And I think that, and there were some remarks that were made to my classmates. I actually never experienced it, but my classmates did, the other women. So it was very sensitive. And there was one captain who was demoted because of something he said to one of the women. And I thought, and this was the first week we were there, and I just thought, this is really the wrong foot to get, stepping off on. We really want to work together. We're a team. So my attitude through the whole program was to be sensitive to the fact that some people didn't want to change, and they didn't want the women there. Some of the wives were suspicious of, what are these women doing here? And I tried to get to know them. I tell a story about it in the book, that I went out of my way to get to know the wives, to be friends with them, to let them know that we're here because we want to be pilots. We want to be the best pilots we can be. We're not here to find a boyfriend or steal a husband, but we're here because we want to fly, and we really love the mission, and we love to fly. And I think we were all able to, in the end, to get along. But it was a little bumpy road along the way. And again, we talk about that in the book. And I acknowledge that there's still issues all these years later. And it really should not be that way. So I think we've got to work, and it's one of the things I like to talk about, that we've got to work on really being honest with each other. And if someone offends me, I need to confront them right away and say, well, you know, maybe you shouldn't have said that, because maybe it might be interpreted the wrong way. And let the guys know that you're professional and you're there because you love this job and you want to do the job. You're not there for some other reason, you know, to make myself famous or to, you know, get publicity. That's not why we were there. Mm. So I could talk about this. I'm going to stop there, but I could talk about this for a long time, because it's a very important issue. And I really don't want to see people hurt whatever job they're in, whether it's the man or the woman, wherever they're working. I really don't want to see people hurt. I want to see people focusing on the mission of the organization and, you know, being the best that they can be.
If I could just jump in for just a second, one of the things that really fascinated me about talking with Eileen, coming from my background in organizational psychology and organizational culture, is that Eileen was an example of leading culture change from the middle. I mean, the Air Force had put out now this directive that we're going to train women pilots. Women are going to be treated equally than men. You can create all the directives and legislation and things like that you want to, but it comes down to implementing it at the personal level. And Eileen had to be somebody in the middle there of that culture change and help the people understand why this was important and why it was not a threat to them, and how this could actually be something that they were going to benefit from. And one of the stories that she talks about is that, you know, going into this gruff, male-dominated pilot training thing, and then at the end of this, at the end of her first year of training, people actually coming up to her and saying, you know, having women here was a good thing because it made us better people, having the women here as part of the class, and we realize that now. And again, I think that's one of those things that if you work with people and have a conversation with them about issues where they might be ignorant about the issues of sexism, or where they're unintentionally or intentionally acting prejudicially to you, the conversation's the best way to start, rather than going to the inspector general and demanding an investigation right away.
Yep, that's very true. I second that. And, you know, I remember one guy came up to me and said, well, I'm really glad the women are here, because not only has the language cleaned up and this place has become more professional, but the guys are trying harder.
Yeah, that says a lot, doesn't it?
On a similar topic, we have questions from the daughter of Rachel Franklin, one of our Patreon supporters. She asked, my daughter would love to know, what barriers do you see that still exist for girls getting into engineering/aerospace, and what can I do now in high school to prepare to overcome them?
Well, actually, Jonathan and I could probably both take a shot at that. But, you know, I'd say, first of all, there's no policy or legal barriers today like there were back in the 1970s. I mean, we did have legal barriers. Well, we had a policy barrier to flying in the military. And then we had, once we got over that, we had legal barriers to flying combat. Those barriers are gone now. So as a young woman, you can frankly pick any job you want and strive for that job. But there's still some, I would say, maybe unwritten barriers where you might enter let's say you decide you want to be an engineer, whether it's aerospace, astronautical, civil, electrical, mechanical, there's all biomedical, there's all types of engineering. And I pick engineering because I personally encourage young people, boys and girls, to consider engineering as a profession, because engineers solve problems and engineers design things, and engineers make the world a better place. And we need creative people to be engineers. And you don't have to be the smartest person in the room. You just have to be a person who likes to solve problems. And I like to push that problem solving goal onto young people, because oftentimes we fear problems and we, you know, close the door. We don't want to confront our problems, but we should confront every problem like it's a challenge. So let's just use engineering as an example. So some young women will start their engineering courses in college and they find out they're the only woman in the room. And maybe they don't fit in with the guys. Well, that's something that the early women experienced in pilot training. And I think if you really love what you're doing, I think that the guys will see that. You're not there for some other reason, because someone told you to do it, or because, maybe you wanted to be the only woman. But no, you're there because you love the mission. You want that course, or you want that degree. You want that career. And just stay focused on your mission, which is take this course, strive for this profession, and always stay focused on that. And don't let these little side things bother you. And that's easy to say, but I've confronted them too. And sometimes I ignored them. I'd hear a joke that really wasn't very funny, and I would ignore it. And then the guys would all laugh and say, would someone explain that joke to Eileen? And so I could have got mad at that, but I actually laughed at that line. Would someone explain that joke to Eileen? I'd laugh at it, and I would really, although the joke itself may not have been appropriate to laugh at. So I've just tried to kind of feel my way through. And for the most part, I didn't engage, and I did not let anyone see that I was upset or mad at them. I would either try to stay neutral, maybe talk to them later, but through it all, I tried to make sure that I kept open communication with everyone, and don't get mad at anybody. I'm not talking to that person. I'm not talking to that person. No, I tried to keep open communication with everyone, even the people that I didn't see eye to eye with. And you're not going to change everyone either. But I think it's important that you get along for the sake of the mission and what the reason that you're there in the first place. And I'll turn it over to Jonathan if he wants to add anything.
No, I think you said it beautifully. I'm curious, when you think about like people who are going to be stuck together on the International Space, not going to be stuck together, they get to serve together on the International Space Station for 6 months to a year. I mean, I think you have to be able to communicate any frustration that's going on. You've got to be able to get that kind of thing out in the open. You can't carry a grudge when you're stuck in a room with somebody for a year. You've got to, and I think it's interesting the way that NASA has its selection criteria have evolved over the years, from the test pilot mentality to the, we've got to work as a team kind of thing.
Yep, that's very true. And the selection board makes phone calls not only to your bosses, but they call people that worked for you to find out what kind of boss you were, and
Wow.
and your peers to find out what is this person easy to get along with, because those qualities are as important as the mechanical qualities and the problem-solving qualities that astronauts need.
Yeah, this is probably the reason why I've worked best self-employed. I struggle as a team player. But never mind, I'm not an astronaut. So, but that's some great advice to Rachel's daughter there, for sure.
Thanks for the question.
T-minus 15, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3. We have a go for engine start. 0. We have booster ignition and liftoff of Columbia, reaching new heights for women in X-ray astronomy.
Columbia is in the way. We've got a fuel type number 1.
Roger, roll, Columbia. We're looking at.
So let's discuss, and I know you've obviously talked about this probably 10 million times, but let's discuss the STS-93 Ascent. I watched that on TV when that was happening, and I know what I was thinking around that time. I can't really repeat what I was thinking because it had some cuss words in it. What was going through your mind at that time? Because that, even watching that to this day, I'm like, how is she so calm?
The reason I was actually very calm through that whole thing, and the reason is because of the training that we've received over the years. So I had been doing simulators. We call them integrated sims, where we work with mission control. And we also worked online with the payload organizations and many other folks, where they're throwing malfunctions at you right and left. And I had been doing those type of simulators since for 7 years by the time that mission, and I had already flown twice. So I was highly trained. And when we lifted off, 5 seconds later, we got that message. It was a tone. It was a message on one of the displays that we had, well, without going into the details, we had a problem. And I immediately went into the simulator mode. I thought I was in the simulator for a split second. And then I went, no, this is an actual launch. And I was just prior to the roll program. So my call would have been a little different. Could I make it if I made it today? When the shuttle commander calls roll program, the whole purpose for that is a communication check. So really all I needed to call was what I saw on the display, fuel cell 1 pH. And that was an indication to Houston of maybe another piece of information for them to help figure out what the problem was. And if you listen to the mission control, I want to say backroom loops, they were working very hard. There was a lot of chatter trying to figure out what the problem was. And we actually had two different problems that were happening parallel to each other. And for the crew, it was actually relatively calm ascent. We only thought we had one problem, and that was a loss of AC-1 Phase A electrical bus. We thought that was our only problem. We did not realize we had these other issues going on, as mission control did. So I was actually very calm. And, if I had known about the leak, I may not have been as calm as I was. I'm actually glad that I didn't know about the leak in a way, because there's nothing the crew could have done about it. We had no action that we could have taken. So hopefully that's the answer to your question. I give credit to our training team and to all those at Johnson Space Center that have worked in the training, the instructor section, all of those years, because they really prepare the astronauts very well for all kinds of malfunctions. You can keep your head, you keep your wits about you. You can analyze what the problem is. You can observe. You can take in all these different indications. And then you make a judgment as to what's going on. And then you prioritize how I want to handle these. And all that's in our simulator, in our integrated simulator training.
And Eileen, you were saying that was actually the last sim run you guys did before you went out to the Cape, was a fuel cell, or was a electrical issue and a loss of engine controllers.
Yeah, that's right. And that was a kind of a huge coincidence, and it even became a joke afterwards that we did our very last Ascent simulation, which is 4 runs, 4 launches, and we had time to do a 5th one. So we did an extra run, and the training team put together the script on the fly. Hey, let's pick some malfunctions out of the air. And they picked AC-1 Phase A failure.
Wow.
And that was the one that happened on the real launch. So it is just a huge coincidence. There were several coincidences on that mission. For example, my license plate of the car that I was driving was Mrs. 93R, which I got the license plate before I was assigned to the flight. Mrs. MRS, like Mr. Mrs., that was a coincidence. And then the fact that the number was 93 was a coincidence. So we were always joking, what does the R stand for? And everyone joked that R was RTLS, or R was recycle, or R was redo, or, we had all kinds of jokes, but, it was really, there were so many coincidences around that flight. It was almost a little bit spooky. But in the end, we flew a successful mission. All I was caring about was, is my crew trained to do the mission? That's the job as a commander. Is my crew trained to do this mission? And that we deployed the Chandra X-ray Observatory safely and successfully. And all of my focus was on that.
Wow. I'm guessing the answer to this next question may be similar, even though it's a different topic. One of our Patreon supporters, Karen Sturm, has asked, she has said she's just watched a lot of the STS-114 coverage again. And she says, how difficult was it to not get really annoyed with the sometimes extremely negative media attitude and panic-driven questions during the onboard press conference? Was that equally something you were trained to do, or was that just within you?
So probably a little bit of both. So I was not annoyed at all by those questions. And I felt, so when I talked to any of the journalists or the people that cover the space program professionally, or, even people that do it on the side, they are speaking for the people throughout the country. They're asking questions. I think that I'm talking to the American taxpayers who paid for the shuttle program. So I felt a responsibility to give them all the information that they wanted, and also to let them know how the crew felt, because as the commander, I was speaking for the crew. And my crew, of course, had mixed feelings. I mean, my crew was upset that foam fell off the external tank on STS-114 because it was foam that brought down the previous mission. It was foam that put a hole in Columbia and killed the 7 crew members. And we still had foam fall off the tank on our mission, and it should have been fixed. So, my crew was upset about that. I tried to keep a level head about it because I've got to get this mission done. Okay, so we did the inspection. We knew we didn't have any damage. So I said, we'll talk about that after the flight. We're safe to come home. Let's refocus on this mission and what we're doing. We had 3 spacewalks. We had 5,000 pounds of gear that we had to move from the shuttle to the station and back. And again, my job as a commander is to get this mission done safely and successfully. And for me to get upset about something that happened, a couple of days ago, that I could deal with that after the flight. So it was to keep a level head. And I always think the purpose of the commander, or whether you're the office administrator or the CEO, you've got to keep people calm, and you've got to be able to look at things with a holistic point of view and not just focus on something that might be irritating me. And that was a serious problem. And the space shuttle program grounded the shuttle, which lasted 12 months because they had to fix that area of the fuel tank where the foam fell off. So I thought the shuttle program, despite the fact that I'm going to say we made a mistake because I'm part of the shuttle program, despite the fact that we made a mistake, we went back and refocused, and let's not make the same mistake again a third time.
One of the things that I really appreciated hearing about you, if you don't mind me jumping in, was on going back to 93 was, after you successfully deployed Chandra in the, very first couple of orbits, then you had a little bit of, there were secondary experiments that had to happen, and there started being all kinds of breakdowns in the process, things that hadn't been rehearsed in terms of everybody trying to work together in the same spot and things like that. And I really appreciated hearing you as a leader talking about calling a timeout when things just started really getting frustrating. You acknowledged that you felt frustrated. You could tell that your crew was feeling frustrated, and you called a timeout, and you kind of asked everybody to talk about what was going on, and let's work this out, and let's figure out how we're going to jointly solve this and make this be successful as a mission. And I think that's a side of the commander role that we don't often get a chance to hear about.
Yeah, and sometimes the biggest problems you have. So that mission, the Chandra deploy, was as perfect as it could be. It was the thing that we practiced over and over again as a team, and it went perfect up in space. I couldn't have asked for anything better. The rest of the mission, which we didn't focus on as much in training, is where we had the problems. So, and I was surprised that ended up being as challenging as it was. And yeah, we did call a timeout one time, and the Capcoms down in Mission Control figured out why we weren't talking to them. And they said, let's just, I don't know, I can't remember if it was Story Musgrave or Shannon Lucid, but that were our Capcoms, but they told me after the flight, yeah, we knew y'all were having a crew meeting, so we decided to lay off for a while.
Absolutely. It's wonderful hearing these stories, isn't it? The
behind
cool.
the
scenes stuff. Great.
This is cool.
And I did one of the things that I hate to plug the book, but that's what we're here for, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, absolutely.
But one of the things that I love about this, and the people who have reviewed the book as they read through it, is that Eileen is so free to admit the things that went right as well as the things that went wrong. Mistakes that she made along the way and what she learned from them. And so there's no pulling punches on any of that in the book. Eileen's very upfront about, here's a bonehead screw up I made, but here's how we got out of it. And I think again that it becomes very important for people to see that astronauts are not saints who are riding on white horses into battle all the time. That they're human beings just like the rest of us too, and they make mistakes. And part of it is just to kind of figure out how are you going to be resilient and work your way out of this.
Yeah. The book is it's a collection of stories and lessons learned. And believe it or not, one of the things that frustrated me the most was on STS-93. We had a call with some students, and I set this whole thing up, and I forgot to close the circuit breaker. And then we did the pass, and we could never make the connection. And the whole reason that it failed was the commander forgot to push in a circuit breaker. And it just goes to show you, and that was one of the many problems we had with what we call secondary experiments. And there's a lot of little lessons learned that come out of things like that I won't go into now, but I talked about a 4-step process of dealing with mistakes that I used for myself, that I used for my crew. And then I also taught my children, when you make a mistake, you need to admit your mistake. You need to go back and fix it. And the third thing is do something to prevent it from happening again. And the fourth one is move on. Don't get mad at yourself. Don't beat yourself up over the head and shoulders. Just and these are some of the people I admire the most. They were able to recover from their mistake and they charge forward on the mission. And I also know people, of which I am one, where I'll dwell on a mistake. And dwelling on a mistake just slows you down and even causes more mistakes. So I have a little talk that I give on that. And I tell my kids, and they're like, Mom, would you stop telling us about your 4-step process? I go, well, it works. Someday you'll thank me for it.
We have a different process as musicians. When we make a mistake, we're told to make the same mistake again to make it look like we did it on purpose.
Oh, there you go.
But I think I prefer your process. That's much better.
I remember a conductor telling me once, he said, you can't change the note that just came out of your mouth, so don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Just focus on the next one that's coming up.
Yeah, exactly.
So true. Absolutely true. Yeah. So we are looking forward to this book, especially. But before we go, I think we've got a couple of questions for Jonathan just about some of your other books, if that's all right, because
sure, absolutely.
We are big fans.
You wrote about 7 years ago, published 2 books about the workers at the Rocket Ranch. I believe one of them was called The Rocket Ranch, and one was called Countdown to a Moon Launch.
Right. These
were among the first books that I can think of that really have spotlit the workers and not just astronauts. Sorry, Eileen. Why is it essential to preserve the space worker stories?
Well, going back and thinking about it is, there were 24,000 people at Kennedy Space Center alone. In the Apollo era, there were more than 400,000 people who were working on some aspect of putting Americans on the moon. At Kennedy Space Center alone, 24,000 people. And as I talked to each one of these folks, I realized, every one of these people showed up and did their job to the absolute best of their capability. And, a lot of these folks at this point now are in their 80s and 90s, and we're losing them very rapidly. As I started going through and doing more and more of these interviews, it was like, well, I should put you in touch with so-and-so, but he's not sharp anymore, or he's not, he doesn't remember that, or things like that. And so it became very important to try to capture that kind of thing. But I guess the theme that starts running through the books when I think about it is going back and looking at those people and the folks that participated in the recovery and reconstruction of Columbia, and even talking with Eileen is, these are ordinary people who find themselves at a very important crossroads in our future. These are people, ordinary guys and women in the Apollo era who are working on putting people on the moon. The folks in deep East Texas who suddenly find the space shuttle crashing down around them and have to help NASA kind of come back together. They could have ignored it, or they could have put themselves into making this kind of thing happen. Or Eileen realizing that this is an opportunity for her. It's not going to be easy, but this is the right time for her. If she's going to become an astronaut, these are the things that she needs to do. And then she sets her sight towards doing that. And I think that's one of the things that just really appeals to me is that I'm extremely humbled whenever I talk to the folks who worked on these programs. And I wonder, would I have had the determination and the grit to kind of see through working 18 hours a day for 2 years in a row to make something important happen? And, I like to think that I would have, but I've never been tested in that way. And so to me, it's just a fascinating thing to talk to people who go through that and find themselves put through that kind of test.
I'm curious, Jonathan, as to whether you have any other projects coming up. What's next? Now you've got this book coming out. Do you know what's next, or is that not decided yet?
I actually have 2 non-book related. Well, actually, one is semi-book related, but we just signed a movie deal to turn Bringing Columbia Home into a feature-length film. And
wow.
So that is, we're extremely excited about that. Mike Leinbach and I have been in this discussion with this production company for 3.5 years, and we finally just signed the contract when we were assured that it was going to be handled with the dignity and respect that we tried to put into the book. And so we're just now starting on the screenwriting process. I'm not actually writing the screenplay, but I'm helping the screenwriter make contacts with people. And so that's going to be an interesting project that's probably going to take 3 to 5 years. And I know I'll be working on that as a consultant. The other thing is that something that just happened within the last month is that I got named to be resident astronomer on 3 Viking Ocean cruises coming up in November, December, January. So I'm going to be at sea teaching astronomy and leading planetarium shows and observing sessions for 2 months. It's going to be different. We'll see how that goes.
Nice. That sounds fantastic.
Awesome.
Eileen, we have one more question from one of our patrons. Which I think is a good place to kind of lead us at the end. Lauren said that she recently watched the Mercury 13 documentary, and it was clear that you had a strong connection with those women. Did you follow Wally Funk's recent flight, and how did that make you feel?
Yeah, I did follow Wally's recent flight, and I've been on the phone with her quite a bit before and after her flight. So I was actually lucky enough to do a long interview with a news network, lasted about 30 minutes, which is a long time, during her flight, and got to talk a little bit about, what they were doing. I've never flown on Blue Origin, obviously, myself, but I knew Wally really well, and I knew a little bit about, how the architecture was of Blue Origin missions. So that was pretty neat. And, Wally also published a book last summer about her escapades throughout her life. And, it was great that she had a chance to fly in space, but take a look at her life and the things that she did. I mean, she did some really amazing things in the flying world and did so much for women in flight, but as well as she was a National Transportation and Safety Board accident investigator. And I don't remember, there's hundreds of accidents that she investigated. And she was also a speaker. And she would talk about flight safety at various flying conventions. So she has done so much for safety and for women in the world of aviation. So she's just a wonderful person. And I didn't, on the Mercury 13, I only met 9 of the 13 women. They were actually, there's only 2 that are still alive today. So it's sad that we've lost them, but I think that their story has been very inspirational to many people.
And Eileen invited them, all of them, to come to every one of her launches as well.
That's right. We have a photo of them in my first launch in the book.
Fantastic. Yeah, so it's a great documentary, and yeah, Wally's book is amazing as well. And we'll put a link to that in our show notes as well, so people can check that out. But thank you very much for sharing this. Eileen, have you got any other things coming up that you would like to share, or is your main focus at the moment this book?
Well, my main focus right now is the book, and I'm also a speaker. So I spend time, now that it seems to be that we're starting to come out of the pandemic. So I'm leaving tomorrow to go on a actually in-person speech. So there's more of those that are happening now. But I do want to tell you a real quick, funny John Young story.
Oh, fantastic.
So John Young,
awesome.
He loved to travel to Great Britain, and the people over there loved him. And he did those trips quite a bit. And so one time, my husband, who's a very good golfer, was playing in the British Amateur Golf Tournament in Nairn, Scotland.
Nice.
And so I went over with him. It was 1993, and he's doing the practice round. He's playing in the tournament, and we noticed a newspaper, paper newspaper that was out on one of those, in front of a restaurant on a street. And on the headline, it said, "Astronaut to speak in Nairn." And I said to my husband, "They know I'm here. They know I'm here." And so he bought the newspaper, and I looked at it, and of course it wasn't me. It was John Young coming to Nairn. And although we actually didn't cross paths with him, we played a joke on him. We bought a postcard from Nairn, and my husband and I wrote on the back, "Dear Astronaut Young, here we are in Nairn, Scotland. Wish you were here." And we wrote a couple other, and we mailed it to him. And so he really enjoyed that. But he was well loved, not only in this country, but he was really well loved in the United Kingdom. And England, Scotland, Ireland, Wales, they still talk to me about him to this day.
That's amazing. That's an awesome story. All right. I think that's a great place to stop. So,
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for both of you for joining us today. This was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And good luck with the book. Can't wait to read a copy myself.
Yep, cannot wait.
Okay,
Thanks.
thank you.
Houston, Columbia, wheel stop.
Roger, Fuel Stop, Columbia. Welcome home. Eileen, to you and the crew, just an outstanding job deploying Chandra and bringing Columbia home for a beautiful landing. There are no deltas. We'll meet you in the post-landing.
Copy, no post-landing deltas. And we'll go to the entry checklist.
Well.
Yeah, that was incredible. It's such a cliche to say this word, but really, Colonel Eileen, I should say, is just such an inspiring person. I just loved her talk about mistakes, because I'm one of those people that beats myself up when I mess up, where like I'll listen to this podcast sometimes on my iPhone. I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe I said that. I mispronounced that word or something like that. And I tend to just beat myself up, and I love that strategy of not getting really emotional about making mistakes. Just sort of like, okay, I messed up. Let's just fix it, move on, whatever. That's such a smart strategy rather than just beating yourself up and feeling bad for the rest of the day.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that was amazing. Oh my God. I thought the John Young stories were really cute. Not trying to take away from her, but I thought that was kind of a neat insight into how he was, because you hear so many different things about him, and I thought that was marvelous.
Yeah, and Toby, who asked us to ask that question, he thinks that all ex-NASA astronauts should have a mandatory John Young question within any interviews, and I think maybe that may be a thing that we have to do, just if we get the opportunity again, because why not? They always seem to be interesting, and he was there for so long and for such a huge part of it, so It's always going to be interesting, isn't it?
I didn't know he was famous in United Kingdom. That's kind of, but I could see why. To
be in Nairn, of all places as well, it's not a big place. And for Eileen to be there and then see that, I mean, the coincidence is nuts. For American listeners, that's pretty crazy that she went there not knowing he was going to be there. It's the equivalent of, me being in Wheeler, Texas, and then seeing that one of my friends was going to be there the next week, and we'd not discussed it, and this is like middle of nowhere town, like absolute middle of nowhere. So that was a pretty crazy story as well. But we've spoken about this a few times, about just when we've been talking about astronauts. It's great to see a human side of them, and I think Eileen there was so human in all her answers, and to an extent she's not. And when she's talking about that launch with the anomalies, STS-93, that still blows my mind. Even then, I know she said she was trained. To me, that still was superhuman when you hear of what they went through. But the way she talks is very human and relatable. There's so many things you can take from what she said and apply to so many situations. Like it was almost a life lessons with Eileen kind of chat, wasn't it?
It really was. It was marvelous. I tell you what, thinking about that STS-93 Ascent, I was in the military at the time when that happened. I was watching it on TV. A part of the reason why I thought her stories were relatable was because we both have a military background.
Yeah.
And I remember watching that launch on TV, and I worked in a nuclear power plant, so I was trained to deal with like when the crap hit the fan and stuff, and just be calm. I would do these drills, be real chill throughout them, and just they'd be practicing horrible stuff, and I'm like, yeah, no sweat, I'm good. I was about to wet my pants during that scene because I was like, what? Like, that doesn't sound right. So I tell you what, they when people say, she is very relatable, but at the time she's made of pure steel, because I was about to wet my pants during that. I'll just be honest. I can't wait to read the book. That's all I got to say. I'm sure the book is full of amazing stories that we haven't even heard of yet. So I cannot wait.
And I think that was the key there. All throughout, I was thinking, I can't wait to read this book. I can't wait to read this book.
It's going to be good.
It's going to have a lot of great stories and lessons in there, I think. And also, Jonathan, how cool is it that the news about bringing Columbia home being turned into a film? I hadn't heard that. I mean, you may have known that from friendships, but that's amazing that that's happening.
Yes, I trust. I mean, I trust since Jonathan and Mike are involved with it, it'll be very well done, obviously. But yeah, I think that book is definitely one of those books that kind of deserves the film treatment, because that's just such a tasteful film treatment, because it's just such a rich story. You've obviously read the book where they just take this awful situation, and they try to make it into something healing for like a community. Not make the situation healing, but they try to find some kind of meaning from this whole thing, and they try to put it back together. They try to find out what happened for family and friends. It's very moving, and it was one of those things, like when I first read that book, I was like, this had to be told. And it had to be told by Mike and John. Yeah. Jonathan. But I just think it's such a fine book. It's amazing, and he's done other books as well, like we previously mentioned, that really spotlight the workers at the Cape and Kennedy Space Center. And those books are full of stuff that I had no idea about until I read them. Like, there's some amazing stories in there, and it really, I love that it spotlit like workers. And I mean, not to say anything bad, we love astronauts, but it's neat to hear about the people who kind of, put the workforce that put everything together, that was responsible for all these great missions. Yes. It was a pleasure to have both Colonel Collins and Jonathan on our podcast. That's for sure. And I'm sure we'll hopefully speak to both of them again about their future projects. Hopefully, that would be lovely. But for those of you who want to watch the full unedited video of that interview, you can head over to our Patreon page, which is patreon.com/space and things. And the details of this new book and how you can find out, and of course, Jonathan's other books, and about how you can find out more about Colonel Collins and Jonathan will be within our show notes. Just check them out on your podcast provider, or if they're not clear there, because some of them don't show the show notes very well, just go over to our website, which is spaceandthingspodcast.com.
You're listening to Space and Things.
So I know we missed the news last week, but we're going to just keep it fairly brief this week, because we've obviously... there's been a lot going on, and we don't want to cut too much out of that interview. It's too good. Yeah, we can't cut it. We can't cut too much of it. Absolutely. So there have been 4 launches since we last recorded the news. There's been 2 in China, although one didn't go so well. So read up about that. And 1 in California and 1 in Kazakhstan. As always, videos and information is in the show notes. But the most interesting of these is it was the Kazakhstan launch on Tuesday, the 5th of October, which saw a Soyuz 2.1A rocket take a 3-person crew up into orbit, and they have since docked with the International Space Station. And it's of note because of who those people are. The commander is cosmonaut Anton Shaplerov, and the other 2 passengers are Klim Shimpenko and Yulia Peresild, who are a director and actress who will be shooting some scenes for a movie called The Challenge while on board the station. More space tourists, but with a very different goal. Yeah, this to me is kind of crazy, because she's only the 5th Russian woman ever to go to space. So this is, I mean, even though I know a lot of people like, oh man, she's an actress. I hate saying this, and I'm probably going to catch flack for saying this. The current expedition crew didn't look too jazzed about having them aboard, but she is the 5th Russian woman in space, and that counts for something, because it is Women in Space Week for World Space Week. That's the theme of World Space Week this week, and there's a lot of weeks in that sentence. So I think it counts for something, because the Russians are famously superstitious about putting women in space, hence why there have only been 5 women so far. And I hope to see that number go up, because, I have no doubt there's more than enough, hopefully more than enough capable, women who are capable of going to space in Russia. I'm sure there's plenty.
So
Absolutely.
hopefully we'll see more.
I agree. This is an interesting story, though, because this is a continuation of a theme of this year. Space tourism is here.
Exactly.
Tom Cruise is apparently going to the ISS to do some filming soon as well. We don't know when, but this is something that people involved with the International Space Station are going to have to get used to. The Axiom mission is going up in the new year that's going to be taking some tourists up to the space station. It's going to become a kind of resort in space, which is pretty crazy, really. But that's the current reality where we're at, isn't it?
Exactly. And next week, I think William Shatner, the Star Trek captain, is supposed to go to space at age 90. I'm happy for him. I'm a little nervous because not to be ageist or anything like that, but if I'll be lucky if I make it to 90. We'll just put it that way. I'll be very lucky if I'm sitting here doing space and things at 90, I'm going to be very blessed. That's all we got to say. I'll be here with my walker, probably.
Yeah, hopefully we'll have someone else to do the editing for that by then.
Yeah, you can just sit in a recliner or something.
Oh, I'd love that. I'll keep doing it. I'll keep doing it well past retirement age, as long as someone steps in for that part of it. We're fine. But yeah, well, as long as we can, Emily. As long as we can, that's for sure.
All right. So perhaps the most wonderful thing to happen in this last 2 weeks was the arrival of Bepi Colombo at the planet Mercury. The spacecraft, which was built as part of an ESA and JAXA collaboration, sent back some photos of its first approach of the planet, which saw it get to within 124 miles of it on Friday, October the 1st. This is the first of 6 flybys of the planet before it'll enter its orbit in 2025. We'll post the photos on our website, but they're really wonderful to see.
Oh man, when this notification came up for me, I was like, what? I forgot that it was happening so soon. It kind of caught me out. I forgot that. I knew it was on the way. I just forgot that it was nearly there.
Yeah, it's so cool to see it because it's not something we've seen a lot,
Yeah.
It's really neat.
Yeah, it's also pretty crazy that I have to do these 6. I don't know if they have to. I'm pretty sure I read they have to. They have to do these 6 flypasts to get it just to slow down, gradually getting the orbit smaller and smaller. But it's pretty crazy, this mission.
Yeah, it's really cool, and I love the pictures we got back so far. I love stuff like that.
And this is the first. It's the first of many as well. Once it gets in orbit, we're going to get some great stuff. So
exactly.
Elsewhere, we've spoken about this over the last few weeks. Virgin Galactic has been cleared to fly again by the US Federal Aviation Administration, or the FAA as they're called, after its 6 weeks inquiry into the suborbital launch on July 11th of its VSS Unity. The FAA statement said that they required Virgin Galactic to implement changes on how it communicates to the FAA during flight operations to keep the public safe. They added, Virgin Galactic has made the required changes and can return to flight operations. Interesting. And talking of the FAA, they have had some other things to consider with regards to Blue Origin after an essay was published by the Lioness on 30th of September, which was authored by 21 past and current Blue Origin employees, all but one of them anonymously, raising concerns about safety of the spacecraft and the culture within the company. Someone from the FAA emailed space.com. Then they said the FAA takes every safety allegation seriously, and the agency is reviewing the information. Which is interesting because Blue Origin, as you mentioned earlier, are flying next week. And William Shatner is one of the crew that will be going up on Tuesday. But let's talk about this article because it's pretty damning of the company.
This is hard to put into words. I've tried to think sort of all week what I want to say about this because I knew we were going to talk about it on the podcast. I think I was talking to my husband the other day, and my husband's really supportive, but I think I was like, a lot of people have this attitude like, oh, why is this stuff popular now? Why is it popular to talk about sexism? Why is it just becoming a topic now? And I'm like, it didn't just become popular now. It's been happening for ages and ages. Just nobody wanted to say anything about it because they were scared because you could lose your job, You could lose your job. You could lose an opportunity. I think now it's getting to the point, I don't know if it was the pandemic or what, but I think people now are just getting to the point where it's like, this has just got to stop. And I think we all need to talk openly about it. I mean, That's just how I feel about it. I think these things need to be spoken about because we have to solve them. My attitude in the past was, I'm just not going to say anything about it. Or I've had some pretty unpleasant things happen to me, but I've just sort of let it, I just never did anything, and I never spoke out about it. Now I regret it because those people are still out there and they're still doing the same things.
I think there's a few interesting things within this article. Obviously, it did talk a lot about the misogyny within the company. If anything, my one criticism of the article is it covered too much stuff. So it made it really hard to know what to talk about. We all want to talk about different...
The focus.
Yeah, if this is all true, then it's crazy. I think that there's one woman who was a previous employee who was let go a couple of years ago. This has to be taken seriously because she knows if there's any way they can come back at her through litigation, they will. And so she has to know that they haven't got a leg to stand on in court if they try and take it to that place, because she won't be able to afford to go against Bezos.
Yeah.
So there has to be something within it that is absolutely bang on to have had the confidence to put a name on it.
Yep.
The stuff about safety is very concerning. But for me, it's the culture stuff, not just the sexism stuff, that all the staff there were given new contracts that said if they ever left the company, neither them or their heirs could criticize the company.
Yeah.
Or they would be taken to court. That's nuts.
Yeah, that's extremely disturbing to me because I'm like, that doesn't, you're not part of the company anymore, really. So what difference does it make if you say anything about them or not? It doesn't, you're no longer with them. And people don't have to believe you. I mean, you could say, Jeff Bezos is really an alien from the planet, I don't know, something. Now I'm going to get sued by him. But I'm just saying, I mean, that was very disturbing to me as well because I'm like, why? What kind of secrets do y'all have?
Yeah, it screams that they know that there's bad things going on, so therefore they know that they don't want people to talk about it.
Yeah, they got to squash it.
I think the wording was in the contract was, if you say anything disparaging, we will take to court and you will pay the legal fees.
That bothers me. Yeah, that's very weird because I've had a lot of jobs in my life. I've been in the military and I never had to sign anything like that.
And I get non-disclosure agreements about perhaps bits of technology or something like that they don't want people to know about. But if it's just about the company as a whole, sorry, I'm going down this route, but America's supposed to be the land of the free, where freedom reigns and this, that, and the other. So if you've got something to say about your previous employer, you should be able to say it with. And the fact they're taking that freedom away from the staff, I find troubling as a non-American. That
I agree.
People in America would tolerate that. That's crazy to me.
I agree. I feel like we should be able to speak out, and speak truth to power. That's what our country. As long as you're not threatening to hurt anybody, I mean, that is
absolutely,
that is what this country was built upon. And also, I've just never heard of anything like that in my life. I mean, like I said, I've had all sorts of jobs. I've signed NDAs before, but that's different. That's more like, okay, we're working on a new technology. Don't give all our secrets away. I can understand that. Okay, that's different. But this is, you can't talk bad about us ever, or else we'll sue you, and your kids can't say anything about us. I'm like, what?
That's so weird.
Especially in light of what they're also trying to do to NASA. They sued NASA over the lander, and now, oh my God, it's just a mess. It's just a mess.
Yeah. Not a good PR week for Blue Origin, and I find it really interesting that they're pressing ahead with this launch next week. And obviously, we hope it goes well.
Yes.
I've been a fan of what this rocket's been doing because I didn't know what was going on behind the closed doors. And sure, every company has probably got some bad things behind closed doors that have been going on. The fact they've tried to shut down the conversation before it's even happened really troubles me. And even though Bezos did a load of wonderful charity stuff earlier this year, which we talked about, and gave a load of money to people, this side of it is concerning for me. And I'm not best pleased. We will put a link to that article in the show notes for you to read for yourself if you wish. But hopefully next week we'll be able to talk about a successful mission, and I hope it's a success for the participants involved, and those who are in the company trying to do good things. But I think that needs to be addressed. That culture and the the people at the top need to have a good hard look at themselves.
Absolutely. I'll just finish with one thing. I think company culture contributes directly to safety.
Yeah, absolutely.
Welcome home, Columbia. Beautiful, beautiful. You want us to take it up the hangar, Joe? We're going to dust it off first.
Thanks for joining us this week. We hope you've enjoyed the interview as much as we did, and thank you in advance to all of those who hit the share button this week.
Yep, thanks for tuning in. We'll be back next week to talk about spacesuits, but don't forget, in space, no one can hear you stream.
Space and Things has been brought to you by And Things Productions.